The deleted Peppa Pig episode, The Candle Wish. It all started like any ordinary morning. Peppa woke up in her room smiling because today was her birthday. Everything seemed normal until she reached the kitchen. The kitchen was decorated with balloons and a banner with a distorted message that read, "Happy Birth, Die." On the table was a cake, but strangely it had only one candle. Peppa frowned.
"Where are the others?"
She asked. No one answered. Her family simply stood there smiling. Too wide, too unnatural. A chill ran down her spine. Sadness washed over Peppa as she blew out the single candle. Suddenly, the room went dark. When the lights flickered back on, the kitchen was empty. The balloons had deflated, and the walls were covered in moss and slime. On the wall, in red letters, appeared the message, "Make a wish," and so she did. Peppa wandered through the deserted house, but it felt like she wasn't alone. Suddenly, she heard a strange voice coming from the mirror. It was calling her. When she looked into it, her reflection didn't mimic her movements. It looked terrifying. Its skin had turned black. It was wrinkled and old. Its eyes glowed eerily, and a sinister smile stretched across its face. Suddenly, it whispered, "You made the wrong wish, Peppa." The mirror cracked open. A dreadful roar echoed through the house. Suddenly, morning returned again. Peppa sat at the kitchen table. Everything looked normal. But when she looked into the mirror once more, standing behind her was another Peppa. The same one, with cracks across her face and hollow glowing eyes. She slowly stepped out of the mirror, reaching out with her terrifying hands. Peppa couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. "You can't escape now, Peppa. You're already on the other side." A normal day, Peppa and George are playing with dolls. One of them was strange. Its head was slightly tilted to the side. Peppa carefully turned the broken doll. A thin crack appeared on the face of the porcelain doll. Sometimes a small crack is just a premonition of something terrible. The light in the room flickered for a second. At that moment, Eevee in the crib flinched and fell silent. She was no longer breathing evenly. Black liquid was dripping from the crack in the doll. Peppa ran to the crib, but it was empty. The outlines of tiny fingers had disappeared, replaced by cold fingerprints. A trail of black liquid stretched from the crib to the dollhouse. Horrified, Peppa took George's hand and led him there. In the central room sat the puppeteer, a figure with a porcelain face, but with cracks running all over its body. In its hands was Eevee, like a doll, her eyes closed, unmoving. The puppeteer lifted its head and slowly opened its eyes. They glowed red. It stroked Eevee's cheek and said,
"My new doll."
Peppa and George froze as if held by an invisible force. The dollhouse continues to play, even if the players are silent. Doll Eevee spoke in a creepy voice.
"You are next."
Eevee was drawing. Peppa was sitting nearby. "You're drawing very beautifully," said Peppa. "I tried to be just like you," replied Eevee. The picture featured Peppa, but her smile was not her own. The next morning, Peppa woke up. George was looking in the mirror. "What's wrong with you?" asked Peppa. "There's someone else there," George answered emptily. In the evening, Peppa looked into the mirror, but behind her, someone else was standing. It was Eevee, but she was taller and scarier. That night, Peppa woke up from a strange rustling in the room. George was no longer there. She quietly approached the mirror and saw a figure emerging from its depths. Distorted, it was Eevee. Her legs, arms, and neck were very long. "Did you think you could stop me?" she hissed. Peppa tried to run, but suddenly several hands stretched out from the mirror and grabbed her. At that moment, her parents woke up. They heard the noise and rushed into the nursery. When they entered, they saw hands almost completely pulling Peppa into the mirror. Suddenly, she found herself inside a mirror world where only darkness reigned. Mama Pig and Papa Pig tried to help, but Eevee caught them too. Moments later, the parents were lying on the floor, very pale and thin.
Welcome to my world. Now you are just reflections. I will replace you all.
Peppa Pig deleted episode, The Mold Frog. This episode was never aired. It begins like any normal day. Peppa and George are in the kitchen. George, did you throw away the old meat? George shrugs. They open the fridge, and the smell hits them like a wall. Something moved. A frog. Dark. Wet. Still. That night, the mold started growing. First, under the fridge, then on the floor, then on George. George was sitting still, his skin turning gray. There was mold on his hand, and it was moving. By morning, George was gone. In his place, a strange, soft figure. It looked like George, but it was breathing through gills, and mushrooms were growing from his shoulders. Mummy Pig didn't react. She looked at Peppa with wide, glassy eyes. "Breakfast is ready, dear." Peppa locked herself in her room, but the mold was already there, on her bed, on her toys, and on her arm. There was a small mushroom sprouting from her cheek. She touched it, and it twitched. Everything behind her, a forest of moving, breathing fungi. And in the center, the frog, sitting, smiling, waiting. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, The Secret Protector. It was an ordinary evening at Peppa Pig's house. Peppa was sitting in her room reading a book. Suddenly, George noticed a strange shadow appearing in the mirror by the window. George called out to Peppa, "Look, what is that?" Peppa approached and saw the silhouette of a monster. George was frightened and hid behind Peppa. At that moment, the shadow began to stretch out from the mirror and transform into a figure. A huge creature with red eyes, sharp teeth, long claws, and a tail. Peppa and George stepped back. The monster started to chase after them. It made terrifying sounds. It seemed no one could protect the little pigs. Peppa ran toward the door. Suddenly, the mirror cracked. A wave of dark energy burst out from the cracks. Everything in the room started glitching. Walls disappeared and reappeared, and the monster kept getting closer. George grabbed his favorite toy, a dinosaur, and shouted, "Help!" Suddenly, the toy in his hand began to move. The little dinosaur grew larger and roared, shielding the small pigs. The monster attacked him. They fought while Peppa and George cowered in the corner of the room, watching this battle with horror. Suddenly, everything went silent. "Dinosaurs!" George exclaimed joyfully. "You defeated the monster. Well done."
My mission is complete now. Take care of yourself,
said the dinosaur before transforming back into an ordinary toy. At first, George was sad that the dinosaur was no longer alive. But during breakfast, he noticed the dinosaur winking at him, and George smiled. Now he knows that he is always protected.